Hello. I would like to open this presentation by giving you the 4 key messages that I would like you to take with you. The first one is that it's okay to consider analog approaches over digital ones if the user experience suggests it is best. The second one is that we are sharing a paper diary for Parkinson's self-reporting that reached almost full compliance and user acceptance. We are also sharing 5 design implications for future Parkinson's disease self-reporting artifacts. And we want you to know about PaperStream, a tool that we created to create and encode paper diaries automatically. Parkinson's disease is a neurodegenerative and incurable condition. It has a wide variety of symptoms, emotional, motor, and cognitive ones, that can vary within hours or days. So the problem is that patients, at least in the UK, they visit their clinicians only twice a year. So there is a need for a more grained monitoring that could help clinicians to tailor medication better to their patient's condition. And that's why we are developing this parent monitoring project in Manchester. So the work that I'm presenting today comes from this umbrella project that is aiming to monitor Parkinson's disease by combining different data sources from a smartphone and to monitor Parkinson's 24/7 for a year without disrupting people's routines while they carry out with their normal lives and by being personalized to their symptoms. But to validate our algorithms, we need ground truth. And we have 2 types of it. The first one is to track monthly symptom fluctuations. So for this, we're using regular clinical scales, like the ones using in hospitals or research. But we also wanted to track daily symptom fluctuations, and for this we had several options. We could have used interviews, digital assessments, or self-reporting. But we went with self-reporting because of the frequency that we would have to apply these assessments to our participants, so every day for a year. And from the literature, we learned that for self-reporting, you can use paper or electronic diaries, but both have pros and cons. So paper diaries are usually low cost. Users don't need much expertise to answer them. Researchers don't need much expertise to deploy them or create them. And there is a low risk of malfunction. In contrast, electronic diaries can have a dynamic user interface. It's easier to reach a wider population with them, and they have a lower data management burden in terms of entry, encoding, and analysis of data. And it's also easier to thoroughly evaluate compliance with them. But at the end of the day, the key message from the literature is that both researchers and users have mixed opinions about diaries, and that it comes down to your research aims and the population that you're working with. In the very specific case of Parkinson's, diaries are used for 2 things in clinical and research settings: to track falls and to track medication cycles in the short term. So that is from 2 to 7 days. To our knowledge, there was nothing that looked at long-term within day and daily fluctuation of symptoms. So with this in mind, we went into an iterative, agile, and human-centered design approach, and we came up with 5 different prototypes for Parkinson's self-reporting. We started with this very implied constraint that we needed to use digital devices, partially because from the literature it is suggested that they're better suitable for within-day changes. We wanted the device to be independent from our monitoring smartphone because we didn't want to remind people that they were being constantly tracked. We wanted to be accessible because we were dealing with people with dexterity issues, and we wanted it to be frictionless because we didn't want self-reporting to feel as a chore. So we came up with this A4 board where participants had to report the impact of their symptoms in their day-to-day life. And to do this, they have 4 Bluetooth buttons, arranged in a similar fashion to a visual pain scale that went all the way from no impact to high impact. And they could press these buttons as many times as they wanted during the day. We deployed these for 15 days and gathered feedback. And from this feedback, we came up with 3 new constraints. So one of our participants actually cut down this big A4 piece of paper into a smaller footprint. And our participants said that they wanted it to be portable because they wanted to report their symptoms constantly wherever they were. So to accommodate for this, we put the buttons on a glasses case. And they also mentioned that they wanted to be personalized to their condition because at the end of the day, there is only a small subset of symptoms different to each person that affects their daily activities. And to respond to this, we reassign each one of the 4 Bluetooth buttons to each one of the 4 main symptoms as chosen by them. They also said that they wanted it to be focused on experience. And this was because they have already adapted their daily routines to their condition, and what it changes is the way they live through it. So we deploy this again for 15 days, but as it happens, technology can fail. And there was an issue of connection between these buttons and the monitoring phones that we were using for our umbrella project. What this meant was that we had to go back to the design board and came up with a third prototype, this time using a cube with NFC tags that you can scan using your smartphone. We discarded this because some of our participants had issues handling this cube with their hands due to their symptoms. But also because by design, you need to unlock your phone to scan these tags, so that could potentially remind people that they were being monitored. We also used on a fourth prototype a microbit, but we discarded it because we couldn't deploy this on time, having a 3D case to make it portable and bigger buttons, so people could use it more easily. And they also had to change their batteries every month, so we didn't want to ask that from them. But we decided to take a step back, and actually we realized that one of our constraints was more flexible than what we thought. So we decided to go back to Analogue and consider a paper diary instead. And what this meant was that instead of tracking within day changes, we had to change to daily fluctuations. And to reduce potential higher user demand, we decided to only ask them to self-report their symptoms once a day. But we gave them the choice to do it twice more if they really wanted to. We were also blending digital and analog here because we anticipated the workload for us. So we created PaperStream to create and encode these paper diaries automatically. Users had to report the severity of their symptoms instead, and they could only circle in the time of login by completing the respective area. And they had to rank their 3 main symptoms on a scale from no severity to high severity. We deployed this for 49 days with 7 participants, asking them to complete the diary once a day at the end of the day whenever they wanted it. We allowed backfilling because this is normal in Parkinson's clinical practice, but we are conscious that this influences compliance. Also, I need to highlight that the diary has high face validity, but its clinical validity has not been tested. So it should only be taken as guidance of the kind of workload that we demanded from our participants. But overall, we reached 98.54% compliance after 9 days. And after 9 months, we can see similar numbers. But to try to understand why our participants liked the diary and use the diary the way they did, we interviewed them after 15 days of using the diary, and we conducted a thematic analysis with 2 reviewers. And our participants were talking about the simplicity of the diary. It was very straightforward to complete. They also noticed the considerations that we had for their writing. So they said that it was great that they didn't have to write anything. They could just circle in the answers. They also said that they appreciate the ink gel pen that we gave them with the diary. So anecdotally, we knew that an ink gel pen could help with the tremor, but we think that this is probably more relevant for people with mild symptoms, although the idea could be adapted for people with milder symptoms, maybe with a marker, perhaps. They also talk about the flexibility of the diary in terms of retrospective completion. So if they forgot to do it one day, they could just do it the next day. And in terms of error handling, if they made a mistake, they could just cross it off and move on. Very interestingly, all of our participants used the visual presence of the diary as a cue to complete it. And we weren't expecting this. And something that also we weren't expecting was that half of our participants actually suggested to have handwritten notes. So they said that they wanted 1 or 2 liners next to their scores, and you'll see in a minute why that was. There were some interpretation issues at the beginning. Some people weren't sure if they had to record the time of login or the time when their symptoms were at their worst. And this could build up the case for within day changes, tracking using paper diaries perhaps, or other electronic approaches. But we will need to check the implications for people with Parkinson's. And finally, we also saw different levels of self-awareness when about their symptoms. So some people were using these handwritten notes as a way of planning their days around their symptoms, trying to find triggers. And we also saw a potential bias in the self-reporting strategy because there were people that were actually more keen on reporting about their symptoms when they were at their best, because they were trying to show how good they were at the moment. Based on these topics, we came up with 5 design implications for future self-reporting artifacts. The first one being to reduce participant completion demand. So we did this by having a physical artifact with a visual presence that served as a reminder for its completion. We also had a flexible completion strategy in terms of retrospective filling and in terms of error handling. But we also think it's because of the immediacy of capture of a pen presented last year in Couth. That basically means that it's very quickly to capture what's in your mind with pen and paper. We also recommend to design to offset the effect of tremor on input. We did this by having only ordinal answers, not open-ended questions, by preprinting as much information as possible, for example, the date, and by using an ink gel pen that, as I mentioned, is probably more relevant for people with mild symptoms. We also suggest to enable implicit reminders. So this is more relevant for self-initiated events, like this one, compared to time-based events, for example. But we think it's important to integrate into people's pre-existing habits, instead of asking them to change their habits to fit your or our methodology. In a way, by being in frequented places, you can make the device work as an aid memoir for participants. And we also think that this could be emulated in digital devices too. For example, by having a notification in the lock screen of a smartphone. And also to design for consequences of increased awareness. So we saw positive and negative consequences. For example, one of the participants was planning their routine around these notes, but from the literature we saw that it is possible to also improve your disease self-management, and people can also set goals to prevent triggers that can make their symptoms worse. And on the negative side, we saw a possible bias in the reporting strategy, but people can also be anxious over their symptoms or dwell on their symptoms, as we saw in a focus group a couple of years ago. And on an extreme case, they could also try to alter the medication schedule to try to feel better. The last design implication is that it's important to consider the effects of handwritten notes in compliance, encoding, burden, and data quality. So for both users and researchers, these notes can provide rich insights. But for some users, it can be a burden, but maybe for some others not. And for some of them, they can also increase symptom awareness. For researchers, this means that they need either the time, the resources, or the technical expertise to transcribe these notes, or these notes usually require extensive coding, and these open-ended questions can have larger non-item response. And with that, I would like you to talk about PaperStream. So this is a tool that you can use to convert a one-page PDF template into a PDF diary that you can print and bind as any other document. Then you can distribute these paper diaries to your participants, and once you collect them, you can scan the diaries, create a one-time rubric, so tell PaperStream where the answers are and what they mean, and then PaperStream will extract all the answers, identify duplicates and missing data. So it's available for Windows, Mac, and Linux. It's fully documented, open source, and citable in that link on the slide. And with that, I would just like to go over, again, the 4 key messages of this presentation. Consider analog over digital. Also, we are presenting a paper diary for Parkinson's self-reporting, as well as five design implications, and PaperStream, a tool that you can use to create and encode paper diaries automatically. Thank you very much.
Hi, Julio.
Hi.
Congratulations, I really like the work. I was wondering, some of the diaries or questionnaires that you have to apply for Parkinson's are like every half hour, or every hours you are, if you're doing a trial, for example.
Yep.
And also there's a problem with people answering later during the day, which is something that doesn't happen here, where you can give the liberty for people to answer when they want. So my question is, to what degree do you think that some of these implications apply when you have these requirements, stronger requirements, when people have to answer the diary? Because so my thought is that in a digital diary, you will be able to prompt people to answer and be more intrusive. So that's.
Yeah, definitely. I think so. It's a matter of balance. Some of these implications will be more relevant than the others. For example, I think the one to enable implicit reminders is quite important for either paper or electronic diaries. There is recently a work that was looking at actually long-term reporting with, I think it was smartwatches. So at the end, Parkinson's is such a complicated condition that depends on pretty much what you're trying to measure, because these diaries that you were mentioning, the ones that tracked are supposed to be answered every half an hour, are to track usually medication cycles and the on and off time of Parkinson's. So my answer would be it really depends. But I think there are some key design insights that could be applied to a certain level to most of them. Yeah.
Hi, Roisin McNally, Lancaster Uni. Thanks for this paper. I think it's something really important and necessary. I wanted to ask about the kind of close to 100% compliance rates that you were getting, and I suppose poke a little into whether this could possibly be due to relationships that you had with participants already. Mm-hmm. Could you say something about how long you'd been engaging with these particular participants and what your thoughts on how this could be scaled up to?
Yeah, so that's very interesting to mention, because there was this kind of discussion and between papers published a few years ago, whether some people were arguing that your relationship with your participants actually make them more likely to comply with your research protocol. And personally, I've been involved with these patients for over a year. So I see them every 6 weeks, and there's obviously a personal relationship that builds up a long time. I would say that I think it's very likely that the level of compliance was influenced by this personal relationship. Not for everyone, perhaps, but I think the size of this effect might be small, and it might be due to the other things that I presented here, mostly to the flexibility. I think that's very important, but yeah, it's with one of my participants, actually, they mentioned when they told me, oh, I forgot to do it some days, and they seemed really concerned about it, right? Partially because I know it's for my PhD that I need to finish. So there might be an effect there, perhaps.
Thank you.
Hi, Matt Hong again. Really interesting work. Thank you for your talk. I really don't ask questions in the same session that I'm presenting, but this is so interesting. So I'm just going to ask one question. So I don't remember I don't know if I remember this correctly, but you mentioned probably that one of the strengths of using paper diary is the flexibility that allows people to go back to change some of their answers if they somehow erroneously marked some of the choices that they made. I wonder, what are the implications of doing that for analyzing the data? So, for example, if there's a learned effect where maybe I thought a pain that I'm feeling, a pain threshold that I'm feeling was the absolute maximum, mm-hmm. and then later I realized that wasn't. Yep. and I go back and change all of my responses. So how do we account for that?
So I think that's part of the clinical validation of any measurement. I didn't do that, so I cannot say whether or not there's going to be that effect on the data. But for the specifics of my study, one of the key points is that we're doing a personalized analysis, not a cross-sectional analysis. That means that whatever you thought it was your symptom at what point, it might change over time, but that will be only compared against yourself. So for us, we think it's not such a big deal, but if you would like to deploy this on a clinical setting, you would definitely need to find a way to take account for that. Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you, everybody, for coming. And with that, I'd like to invite everyone to the reception at 6 o'clock.